Okay, in this lesson we will be working through the quadratic formula. I'm going to show you how to derive the quadratic formula, use it to solve, determine a quadratic equation, and then we're going to figure out what the discriminant is. Okay, so before we get into the lesson, we have the bell ringer. So these were your three questions for the bell ringer. You needed to use the square root property to solve this equation, and then you needed to complete the square with the other two. All right, so number one, we're looking to get rid of that. All right, so in order to do that, we just have to square root both sides because we want to undo that square. That'll cancel with that, and then we'll just get x minus 4. All right, and then we got to get the square root of 16, which is a 4. Remember, when we do this property, you have to give it a plus or minus on the right-hand side because the square root of 16, you could have a 4 squared or a negative 4 squared. All right, and then we just finish it up here. So you could, like I said before, you could make two equations like this. One with the positive, one with the negative 4. All right. I'm not a fan of that way. I like to treat this plus or minus 4 as a separate thing, and I like to just move variables or move other numbers over towards it. So I'm going to add the 4, and then it would look like this. X equals 4 plus or minus 4. And then I'm going to do this in my head here. I'll add 4 to get one answer, subtract 4 to get the other answer. So when I add 4, I get x equals 8. And when I subtract 4, I get x equals 0. So your two answers. And you can check these two answers to make sure that they work. All right, so completing the square next. So this one, these were a little tricky. Okay, so to complete the square, that x squared has to be by itself. And then we have to get both x's by themselves. Okay, so you can't have a leading coefficient, can't have anything there, and the x's have to be alone. Okay, so the first thing you want to do in this question is move the 12 over. And then we have something like this. X squared plus 8x equals 12. And at this point, this is where you can complete the square, and I can add something to both sides. So I may have something like this. All right, and then that's what we're trying to figure out what we need to add to both sides in order for this to be a perfect square trinomial. So that's where you took half of the middle number. Okay, so 8 over 2, that's half of 8 is a 4. And we're going to square that. Okay, that's the completing the square part when I add that 16 to both sides. Okay, so that 4 squared is what I need to add to both sides in order to factor. So two numbers that multiply to 16 and add to 8, well, that's 4 and 4, like we just did. So this is going to factor to x plus 4 squared. And on the right-hand side, we have a 28. And now we're back to like what we did up here, where you just square root both sides. Okay, so we use the square root property to finish out. So we have x plus 4 equals plus or minus square root 28. And let's go ahead and simplify that down. I'll take that out of here and we'll simplify it. So 28, break it down, 2, 14, 2, 7. Got a pair of 2's, so this would be 2 root 7. Okay, and then we just got to move the 4 over to finish it out. So we'll subtract 4 from both sides. X equals negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 7. Okay? And since this doesn't work out to be a nice answer, it's not an exact answer. If you just round it, you leave it like that. So this is what we got, negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 7. Number 3. So we have a number in front. You can get rid of that whenever you want to. You can do it first or second. And we have a number in the back. And again, it doesn't matter which one you do first as long as you move them around and get them out of the left-hand side. So I'm going to move the 3 first. Okay, 2x squared plus 5x equals 3. And then we have to divide everything by 2. So we are going to get fractions in here, which is all right if we kind of follow the process. Okay, so we're going to have the x's by themselves here. So let's put that blank here so we know what we're adding to both sides. Remember, it's always addition because it's completing the square, so you're adding a perfect square. So now you got 5 over 2. So how do you take half of a fraction? Well, if you take half of anything, you're going to divide it by 2 or multiply it by a half. So if I want to do half of 5 halves, it's going to be something like that, where I do 5 halves times 1 half, which is 5 fourths. Okay? So that's half the middle number. Now I need to square that. Okay, and how do I square a fraction? Well, I'm going to write it out twice. So 5/4 times 5/4, which would be 25/16. Okay, that's our number that we're going to add to both sides, 25/16. Okay, now the second part of this is, well, how am I going to factor something like that? Two numbers that multiply to 25/16 and add to 5/2. Well, if you remember what I said when I taught the lesson, usually that number that you're squaring, well, not usually, always, the number that you're squaring is going to be the one that you're using to factor. So x plus 5/4 squared. So 5/4 times 5/4 is 25/16. 5/4 plus 5/4 is 5/2. That's what it factors to. Okay? And then we got to add this stuff over here. So you're going to want to get common denominators. So we need a 16. So we'll have to times by 8, times by 8. And we get something like that. So 24/16 plus 25/16, that is a 49/16. And you should be realizing something coming together here, because 49 and 16 are both perfect squares. So when we do this right here, our square root property, we can square root the 49 and the 16. So we end up with x plus 5/4 is equal to, don't forget your plus or minus, 7/4. Move the 5/4 over there. And now you got to do once with a plus, once with a minus. And the denominators match, so we should be good to go. So -5 plus, or excuse me, -5/4 plus 7/4 is a 2/4, which is a half. Okay. Now we'll do the minus. So -5/4 minus 7/4, that's -12/4, which is a -3. So those are our two answers, and we should be able to check those, and they should work. Okay, so that's our bell ring. Now, if you need to turn in your homework, please do so, and we'll get on with the lesson. Okay, so we are going to start with deriving the quadratic formula. So this might take a couple minutes, so kind of follow along. I'm going to ask some questions while I'm going through it, so kind of think through those questions in your head, the answers in your head, and see if you can kind of get a little bit ahead of me. All right, so a quadratic in standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So we're looking to solve this thing. All right, so just like the last question, we have to move the c over and we have to get rid of the a. All right, so let's move the c over. All right, and we get something like that. Next, we want to divide out that a. All right, so that's going to take it out here. So we'll have x squared plus b over ax is equal to, and this is where we're going to add something to both sides. All right, and I guess I didn't mention at the beginning of the clip here that we are going to complete the square, and that's how we're going to end up deriving the quadratic formula. We just complete the square with this, and then we should have something that's a quick formula for us. All right, now we need to figure out what goes here. So that's where we got to take half that middle number. Right, so b over a, take a half of it, that is b over 2a. All right, and that's what you have to end up squaring to add to both sides. So we got b squared over 4a squared, same thing over here, b squared over 4a squared. Okay, and then on the left here, so we got our completed square over there, and now that needs to factor. And so that's the purpose of me writing this over here, or the thing in the parentheses, because when I factor, that's what's going in the parentheses. So x plus b over 2a squared, right? This factors to this. And now we got to remember how to add something like this over here. Okay? So we got to get common denominators. So this has a 4a squared. This just has an a. So we need to multiply this by a 4a to get that common denominator. All right. And I'll rewrite this over here. Right down here. So negative 4ac plus b squared. We got that common denominator of 4a squared. And now we're just going to square root both sides. So square root this, and I'm going to complete it up here. So we have that square root canceling out that square, so we just have x plus b over 2a. And then on the right, we're going to square root the top and the bottom. So square root, and I'm going to switch these around. So b squared minus 4ac. We don't want that leading coefficient to be negative. We'll just switch them around. If I square root the bottom here, square root 4 is 2. Square root a squared is just an a, so we got a 2a. And then we're going to just move everything to the right. Okay, so we're going to subtract that b over 2a from both sides. And in the end, we already have a common denominator, so we can put these together. We have negative b. And I forgot that plus or minus when I did that square root property. Make sure you remember that. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac. And 2a is underneath all of that. So this right here, that's our quadratic formula. So you want to be sure you have this written down somewhere. You're going to need it. All right? So I'll show you how to use that coming up. And if you missed any of these steps, it should also be on your notes. I just took you through how to get from one to the other. Okay? So this is the whole process. All right, so we are going to use the quadratic formula to solve these. Now, if you need to, remember, a quadratic is something like this. So if you need to identify what A, B, and C are, think about it like this. You can write them down if you want to. I would put numbers in front of all the variables. Okay, so A is 1, B is the negative 3, the sign goes with it, and C is the negative 28. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to put them in that formula. So remember your quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This is your formula. You're going to rely on this today. All right, so since I'm doing negative b, this is going to flip signs. All right, I'm just going to put everything in there maybe excessively as it's supposed to be written. You could simplify that while you're writing it in there, but I'm just going to write it all out. Okay, b squared, so that's a negative 3 squared minus 4 times a times c. All right, all over 2 times a. So this is my formula. Okay, this part right here. Okay, I suggest putting that all on your calculator at once, and whatever sign that comes out with, that's the sign you're going to write down. So if it's a positive, put a plus. If it's a negative, put a minus. Because that is where people make mistakes on the quadratic formula. Okay? So start to simplify a little bit here. We should have a 3 plus or minus square root. So 3 squared, that's a 9. And make sure it's in parentheses if you're using your calculator to get those squares, because that should be a positive there all the time. And then we have a negative 4ac. So negative 4 times 1 times the negative 28 will be a positive 112 all over 2a. So it's just like this. So simplified down, add the 112 and the 9. So we got 3 plus or minus square root 121 over 2. And you can use your square root button if you don't know what the square root of 121 is. If it's a perfect square, like this is going to be, you want to write out the perfect square and get your two answers. If it's not a perfect square, like we got in previous questions, you want to simplify it down and you'll get to leave it. And I'll show you that on some of the examples here. So 3 plus or minus 11 over 2. Now we have to get our two answers, right? We got to do our answer for the positive, answer for the negative. So you get your two answers. So 3 plus 11, that's 14 over 2, which is 7. So we got one answer there. All right. Then we'll do the 3 minus 11. So 3 minus 11 is a negative 8 over 2. So it's a negative 4. Our two answers here are 7 and negative 4. And we can check those two answers by plugging it into this x and this x. You should end up getting a 0 if you check it. Okay? So I highly suggest checking your answers if you are unsure about the quadratic formula, because a lot of people will make mistakes here, or they'll make a mistake where they wrongly identify A, B, and C. Okay? So give the next one a try. pause the video here and then replay to get your solution. All right? So we have A equals 1, B equals 5, C equals -8. Throw them all in your formula. Negative B plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. Again, pay attention to this chunk right here. All right, I need to make sure we have the right sign there. So it's all over to A. Okay? When you get good at the quadratic formula, you can start doing this whole section underneath the square root. You can start doing all that at one shot if you want to. Just throw it in the calculator. Until that point, though, throw everything in your formula and show the process for simplifying. Okay? So we're going to have 25. And again, we get a negative times a negative here. So that should be plus 32 over 2A. Okay? That's a little arrow there. Simplify down. All right, so we got -5 plus or minus square root. So that is a 57 in there, all over 2. Okay, so we got square root 57 in there. So not a nice square root. Let's see if that divides down by anything. So it's odd, so I'd probably try a 3. And if we do try a 3, you get a 3 and a 19. 19 is prime, so we can't break that down anymore. So your solution for this one is -5 plus or minus square root 57 over 2. All right. Now this one might be kind of difficult to check your solutions. I want you to leave your solutions like this. I should write a x equals. All right. But if you plug that in your calculator, so -5 plus square root 57 over 2, one of your answers is going to be 1.275. Okay, we get the other one. So we want to do -5 minus square root 57 over 2. You get a -6.275. Okay, so you would end up plugging these two values into the x's here if you wanted to check. And since we rounded on both of those, you wouldn't exactly get a 0, but you would get pretty close to 0. Okay? So that's how I would check if I got a kind of a funky answer like that. All right? So let's look at a couple more. All right? So we'll do 3 together, and then I'll have you try 4 on your own. What I do want to mention is when you are doing the quadratic formula, it has to be written in this particular order, or it could be a Y or a Z, whatever letter you're using, okay? So if you had something like this, okay, if we had something like that, we got to move the 4 to make it look like this before we can do anything else, okay? So that's called standard form. Make sure it's in standard form before you do anything else, all right? Let's try number 3. So A equals 4, B equals 4, C equals 1. Let's throw it all in our formula. -B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4 AC all over 2A. All right, so simplify some things down. All right, we got -4 plus or minus square root 16, and this will be a negative here because it's only one negative over here. So -16 over 8. And then keep going. So -4 plus or minus square root 0 over 8. Now, we got a 0 in the square root. Okay? Well, what's the square root of 0? It's just a 0. So that doesn't really do anything. So we only have one answer of -4 over 8, which we want to reduce down. Okay? We take out a 4, and you get a -1/2. All right? So we can end up getting zeros underneath the square root, which is actually nicer for our answers. We can get positive numbers that simplify, some don't simplify, and we can also get negatives in there, which, if you remember, negative square roots will give you an I. Okay? So go ahead and try number 4, and then come back and play the video for your solution. All right, number 4, identify A, B, C. A is 1, B is -3, and C is a 7. Go ahead and throw it in your formula. -B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4 A, C. All right, extend that a little bit, all over to A. And reduce things down. So double negative gets me a positive. 3 plus or minus square root. That's going to be a 9. And we'll have a positive there. Or excuse me, a negative. We have a negative times a positive, so it'll be a minus 28. We don't need our thing that long. And then over a 2. Simplify things down again. 3 plus or minus. So that's going to be a negative 19 underneath there. So square root negative 19 over 2. And now you got to simplify a little bit. We cannot have a negative square root, so we got to bring that I out. So we got 3 plus or minus I root 19 over 2. So there we got a negative underneath that square root, and we had to simplify that down. 19 is prime. It doesn't simplify, so we are good. Okay? So next thing we want to talk about is how we can determine an equation with solutions that are given. Okay? So we have a quadratic. It's going to be something like this. ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, or equals 0 or equals y in this case. Maybe y equals. That way it's an actual equation. Okay, and we're trying to find what that is based on the solutions. So we're going to be kind of working backwards, all right? So 3 and 5 are both solutions. The best way to think about this is the way we factor things, okay? So think about if we had something that was factored and you got those two solutions, you did something with factors and set them equal to 0, right? So if I got 3 as an answer, my factor would have been x minus 3. And if I got 5 as an answer, I would have had x plus 5 as my factor. So these two factors are what we got from the quadratic, which looks like something like this. So what we got to do, take our answers, write them as factors, and then FOIL it out. Okay? So if we FOIL this out, we have x squared plus 5x minus 3x minus 15. And then just simplify down. So we got y equals x squared plus 2x minus 15. All you're doing is putting those answers back into factors, foiling it out, and then you got your quadratic that looks like our quadratic in standard form. You want to make sure you write that in standard form. Okay? Now B, you might have to do a little bit of mental gymnastics because sometimes when we got fractions, remember we wrote those a little bit different. So we'll do the 4 first. So how are we going to write 4 as a factor? If we got a 4 as an answer, then we probably should have had x minus 4 as one of the factors. Okay? And then with the half, think about how we got those answers like that. You would subtract over the constant, divide the thing that's in front of the x. So this would be like a 2x minus 1, right? So we'd add the 1, divide the 2. That's our half. And then we just FOIL it out. Okay? If you didn't like this one, you could have also done x minus 1/2. You'd end up getting the same answers, but you'd end up getting common denominators and that kind of thing, which people don't like very much. Okay? So FOIL it out. So 2x times those, 2x squared minus 8x. Take that through, negative x plus 4. Simplify things down. So we're going to have y equals 2x squared minus 9x plus 4. That's the quadratic that has solutions of 1/2 and 4. Okay? So C, I want you to try to do this one on your own and then come back for the solution. You're just putting the 2i and the negative 2i into the parentheses with the x just like we've done on the last two. But remember, I squared turns into negative 1. So go ahead and give that one a shot. All right, so this one becomes x minus 2i. This one becomes x plus 2i. And then we're FOILing it all out. All right, so x squared plus, now this will look kind of goofy, 2xi. And then we got a minus 2xi. You always want to write the I last. And then a negative 4i squared. So these will go away. That's kind of nice. And then here's that I squared that I told you about. Okay, so I squared, that turns into a negative 1, which is going to flip the sign of that 4. So we're just going to end up getting y equals x squared plus 4. That's our quadratic that has solutions of 2i and negative 2i. All right? So just put them in parentheses with the x's, FOIL them out. Now, last thing we want to cover, it's a piece of the quadratic formula. It's called the discriminant, all right? So right here, this should look familiar, okay? So if we write out our quadratic formula, all right, that's the piece that's underneath the square root, okay? So what's the purpose of that? Well, we can use that to figure out how many roots or how many solutions we're going to have and what kind they are, okay? So here's our options. If we get a number that's bigger than 0, you'll get 2 real roots. You'll get 2 answers, just like we first started doing, okay? If you got a discriminant equal to 0, so that would be like, remember when we got the square root of 0 underneath there, we only had 1 real root, so 1 regular answer, okay? These 2, they're real roots. They don't have an I, all right? No I. And then the third one, we got a discriminant less than 0. So that's when you get a negative number. You get 2 imaginary conjugate roots, or 2 roots with an I. All right? So really what we're thinking, is this going to be positive? Is it going to be a 0? Or is it going to be a negative? Those 3 tell you that we got 2 real, 1 real, or 2 complex. Those are the 3 options with the discriminant. That's really what you got to remember. Okay? So let's give it a shot. Let's use the discriminant here and see what we get. Okay? So find a discriminant of the equation x squared minus 5x minus 14. Make sure it's in the right order. Okay? And then all we got to do is just b squared minus 4ac. We don't have to worry about the other stuff. So b is a negative 5 squared minus 4 times a times c. Whatever number this is, it's going to tell us what we're going to have for solutions. So this would be a 25, and this will be a positive. Okay, so 25 plus 56. Let's double check the math again. 4 times 14. That's 56. So 25 plus 56, that's a 70, 81. All right, so we got an 81. That is a positive number, which means we have 2 real solutions. Okay, so there's our discriminant. How many real number solutions does the equation have? 2 real solutions. And then use the quadratic formula to find the solutions. Okay, so we already did the b squared minus 4ac stuff. That'll save us some time. So let's just do the rest of the formula. So negative b plus or minus square root discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. That's the 81 that we got, right? All over 2a, which is just a 1. So square root of 81, that's just a 9. We got the double negative going on here. So we got 5 plus or minus 9 over 2. Since these are all whole numbers, no square roots, no radicals, we got to get our 2 answers. Okay? So if we do the plus there, so 5 plus 9, that's 14 over 2. That's a 7. And then we do the minus to get the second answer. 5 minus 9 is a negative 4 over 2 is a negative 2. So those are your 2 answers that you should have for using the quadratic formula. Okay? So again, discriminant, just the number underneath the square root, that 81. All right? And that tells you how many and what kind of solutions you're going to have. And that could save you a little bit of time in the quadratic formula if you separate it out a little bit. Okay? So your homework is the worksheet that has these questions on them. If you have any other questions, let me know. Thank you for watching the video.